Hi everyone and welcome. I'm down here in my wormery. On the shelf behind me I've got all my different worm bins. And over in that frame too there's worms in that bag over there. And I've got a couple bins that I want to feed today. The ones that I've got on the list to be fed are the two youngest of my bins. They're both red wiggler bins and they're down there on the floor. I've got an arrangement where I've got the oldest stuff up here on top and I work my way down to the youngest. The two bins that are getting fed today are the older one is 50 days old, and the younger of the two is 31 days old. A lot of times I write this stuff down and show a little board with the information on it. Those numbers seemed pretty easy to remember. I believe, here again, I'm going to see what I can remember in terms of the numbers. I believe on the 50-day-old bin there's been 7 feedings. That includes 1 feeding for the material that was placed in the bin, counting as a feeding, plus 6 subsequent feedings. In the case of the younger bin, it was fed 4 times. That means one of the feedings was the food placed in the bin when it was originally built, and there have been 3 feedings up until now. And the feedings are occurring in a little pattern, basically. I'm feeding in the corners, moving from corner to corner each time. And I thought that I had fed in each of the corners in all of my red wiggler bins at this point, but when I was reviewing some of my videos last night, trying to figure out where we stand with these, I did realize that I had one more corner to go on the newest bin to get to the point where all 4 corners have been fed. So whatever, just a little correction to what I had stated in one of my earlier videos during the past week, that all of my bins have had all of the corners fed. Minor little correction. I just figured I'd mention it because I did notice it was not actually representative of the truth. So I'm going to get these up onto the bench and start feeding. So let's get to work. All right, so we'll begin here with the, which one is this? This is the younger of the two. This one's a month old now. It started on the 14th of last month, and it's the 14th of this month. And it's a 31-day month that just passed. So the bin's 31 days old at this point. A nice age for a bin. I remember the past few check-ins on the bin, I would always feel like, man, this thing is still so young and the material all still looked so raw and unprocessed, and after a month I think we're probably not going to have that same type of reaction. I think we're going to finally start seeing some nice progress. I'm always worrying about these little guys being stuck to this plastic, especially with these plastics that are attached to the cardboard backing. I can't just fold the bag in half and protect the worms from the air, the dry, unpleasant air. You know how they like the moisture. This paper's getting pretty beaten up, I must say. Look at all these castings that I just sort of piled up together by lifting the paper. There's holes all over this thing, so I'm trying to think of what's the safest way to pick it up in such a way that it doesn't just shatter from its own weight. How do you like that? We've preserved the paper one more feeding. I guess it's kind of become a little, I don't know, it's like a challenge to see if I can keep these pieces of paper going as long as possible without them tearing up and just getting, you know, shredded. And there are so many very, very tiny little worms all over this paper. I could see missing a couple. That's what I worry about. I'd hate to see one of these little guys, you know, walk off the paper for fear of the light or the dryness or whatever and end up in a really bad situation. So, I don't know. Maybe I've just got to be a little bit less contemplative of the risks. Yeah, that paper will make it one more week. If we're careful, maybe even more. So this piece of paper here is just showing us where we last fed. The whole surface has kind of this weird pitch to it. It's dipping down over here too. So even though this was the most recent feeding, I got a feeling that these previous feedings, the previous 2 feedings, there was never a feeding applied here yet. That's still the original cover, those leaves over there. I don't think we've disturbed anything. Let's get rid of this paper too for a moment. Paper's holding up pretty good still. A lot of times this wet, damp edge gets just nibbled away as well. So after 31 days, The bin is actually starting to exhibit some nice signs of castings piling up. You know, a lot of castings came along with the worms when the worms were dumped in here, so I usually sort of try to ignore any casting development on the very middle, because I often think that's just stuff that came along for the ride. It's not really indicating progress in the bin. But it's out here on the edges when you start looking around. Like this was the most previous feeding. Not the most previous feeding, that was right here. This was the one prior, 2 weeks ago. So we're just kind of bouncing around. I don't know, I got kind of drawn to this corner for some reason. Maybe because of the castings. We were just talking about how nice the castings are starting to pile up in this bin. I don't want to go crazy tearing it apart, but I do feel like I'm seeing remnants of the previous feeding. I don't really recall the details of how it was put together, but a couple oddities in this container are the pine cone. You know, I've heard people composting pine cones, and it makes sense that you'd be able to do so. And here too, you can kind of see the fibers or the material. It's the beach towel. And the fact that I could tear it this readily in my fingers, don't be so impressed. It's not because the materials, it might be, but I don't think it's attestable to the breakdown that has occurred here and within the bin. That's just a really old towel that was out by a window and getting sun shined on it every single day for years. I think it's just pretty much been broken down by the UV energy. But yeah, you know, lots of leftovers, obviously, remnants of the previous feedings, but also what drew me there in the first place was lots of nice castings piling up, so that's pretty cool. Let's bounce a little bit more around before we feed. Just curious, going back 2 feedings now, or 3 feedings, right? This was the last one, this was 2 feedings ago. This is the third feeding I referred to, right? Whereas the 4th one that this bin has ever received was just the original feeding throughout. So when we open this corner up, we probably wouldn't expect to see a lot of action since all the feeding has been kind of bouncing around in locations other than there. But I always get surprised. I always predict what I'm going to see, and then I always screw it up. All right, so yeah, nice little worm party. I didn't really sense anything in particular as far as leftovers are concerned. Just a lot of bedding that seems to be soaked with some of the juices of the food that they ate, but nothing I could really distinguish as the food itself. Just a chunk of towel down in here. Beach towel. No, this is part of egg carton, actually. This was the beach towel right here, but I don't want to yank it out. It's a larger piece. It could be kind of submerged under here for a while, so I don't want to upturn the entire thing. Let's just take one quick look at the last feeding over here from a week ago, see how it's progressing. I would assume that here we would probably find leftovers. Here too, I could see the little bundles, paper bundles with the food in it. I could see little white specks, and nowadays I'm always not so sure if the white specks I'm seeing are, you know, my grit, my pulverized eggshell that I use for grit, or are they mites? I'm kind of becoming paranoid because it seems like mites are getting all over my bins. You might have already noticed just right on the outer rims of the container up on the walls, there are little tiny bugs just all cruising around. I don't know. In a way, I almost tune them out or ignore them because maybe I've just been seeing them all the while and they just don't seem like anything to me. They don't show up anywhere other than on the bin. So I don't worry about them invading the house and infesting, but they are cruising around, all probably just helping with the breakdown of the food. This is a banana stem. I don't know if I guess maybe since it was here, maybe it was part of the original feeding of the bin going a month back now. I don't know. Here, I think as we sort of semi-predicted, there's just nothing because partially no food, obviously, but also because it's rather dry in here. And that's also, I think, because there's no food, no worm action. We're gonna remedy that now. Usually I go with 2 handfuls of food wrapped in some sort of a piece of paper. I'm gonna go 3 small. Instead of 2 handfuls, I'm gonna go with maybe a slightly smaller quantity in terms of a smaller size handful, but then I'll I'll make up for it with a little bit of coffee. How does that sound? But it'll also give me the opportunity to get rid of 3 coffee filters instead of just 2. They're starting to stack up over here. So that was the reason I figured I would spread the feeding that was normally account for about 2 generous handfuls will be the same amount. 2 generous handfuls spread out 3 ways. How does that sound? All frozen stuff, a variety of veggies, fruits, whatever, you know, whatever's around. It's all good. You know, this is a pretty young bin too, so I like to be a little bit more generous with the application of grit in my slightly newer bins too. So we'll go ahead and we'll sprinkle a little of that in here too for them. The grit always seems like a really popular item, especially like when I review my time-lapse videos. I could just see them sucking up all those little tiny particles of crushed eggshell. They really seem almost drawn to that before even the food and stuff like that. So I think all this frozen material, all this food is going to start emitting moisture, dampening all the surrounding stuff, and then the worms will come in. It'll be a nice cozy spot to be. And now we're going to have a container where all 4 corners have a lot of action going on, which is pretty awesome. All right, well, that's my youngest bin. Things look pretty nice. It's off to a good start. It's not lame, I guess, the way it is in the beginning. Because, you know, an early stage bin where it's all just still all uncomposted bedding and stuff, it's just, you know, kind of lame to see. It's when you finally start seeing so much piling up that you got to kind of, you know, dig through it a little bit. That's when it starts to get a little bit exciting. And I think the moisture level in here is pretty decent too. This plastic covering's been doing a good job, but it's not doing the job entirely. So if you noticed when I took it off, as we return it, I'll usually use the coffee filter here as an indicator of where I last fed, but then I'll also use this cardboard covering to push up against that piece of paper to really create a nice connection between the edge of the bin and the edge of the cover, leaving on the opposite corner 2 kind of large openings. And that was the reason I kind of thought, hey, I'll just come in here with an extra piece of plastic and cover up those large openings. I'll be left with a couple small spots where air can flow, but not nearly as much as if I didn't have this piece of plastic here. So I think it's doing a nice job. So let's get on to the 50-day-old bin. Alright, so this is the 50-day-old bin. It should look a little bit more advanced in its progress than the bin we just fed. Hopefully. Let's see what we see. Not much going on. Just a couple worms have come up here to enjoy the recirculating moisture. And you know, when I take these pieces of paper off, all these castings that are on here typically fall off. So anytime I see fresh accumulation, I assume that that's just stuff that was put there over the past week or since the last feeding, whatever time period that may have been. So it's not a lot, but still it's a little something. Shows a little bit of traffic. And again, we're marking in the corner that we fed in, going clockwise, so we'll feed down here. I'm doing it in the same location in each account, on each bin as well. How do you like that? A lot of times I'll speed up the video because the little white mites are so slow moving you can't even see that they're alive unless you play back the footage really fast. And you can see some movement, but with these darker colored mites, I don't know if they're orange or whatever the color is, they're pretty active, a large number of them. Same little things that we saw walking around on the walls of the containers. But, I don't know, here and there, if they pile up a little bit, I shouldn't panic, I don't think. I've just been seeing mites popping up, or I'm not even sure, maybe they've been there all the while. Maybe I just didn't notice. But once you notice, you just can't help continuing to notice. A lot of times you can ignore them and not even realize they're there, but Sometimes when they catch your eye, you know, wow, very nice here. Very nice moisture. You saw the plastic covering this one. There were no openings anywhere. This was completely covered, you know, wall to wall. So even on the very edges, you could see almost like, you know, dampness accumulating on the leaves. Maybe this corner here has a little bit drier looking material. But, I don't know, these two right next to me look like they were quite nicely covered. This is still signs of the original build. When I see these rings, that's usually my indicator that I'm still dealing with a fairly young bin. I cut up those, you know, paper towel tubes, and I like the structure it provides in the early days of the bin. But when they're still whole, it tells me I'm still kind of in a fairly new bin. But moisture level just throughout the entire bin is very consistent. That's the one thing I could say. Sometimes you have like little pockets of moisture. And here's a banana stem. Probably goes back to the original build of the bin. Coming along quite nicely. That's 50 days, right? Coming up on 2 months of decomposition in the bin. And I shouldn't rub it too much because now I've sort of opened it up. You can see all the fibers inside. Let's leave it. Let's just see what the worms accomplish with it over time. Now it's going to be mixing in the old with the new, but that's fine. I'm sure we'll be able to tell the difference if we stumble on it, that it's an older vintage feeding. Okay, we'll do the same here because I want to get rid of these filters. I'm still going to be left with one even after we're done feeding here today. But they've been piling up. See them go. There's one. We've got room for 2 more. 2. Oh, we haven't even gone digging around this bin yet. I wonder how things are progressing in the previous feeding zones. Let's get this thing fed, and then we can check things out before we close up shop. Number 3. Although that almost seems like a generous handful right there. Maybe a little more than it needed. I don't know. The bins seem to be doing pretty well, even though it's a little chilly down here. I always sort of expect slightly slower composting activity in the winter time when things cool off down here in my basement. But these are red wigglers, and they seem just to adapt nicely to different conditions, and it doesn't bother them so much when things cool off. Some of my other types of worms do seem to slow down, but these little guys keep going. So here's one starting to open up, starting to break down. So here too, we can go back in time, see how things looked in previous feedings. But I don't want to rip it all apart, so, you know, from a week ago, we could see that some sort of newsprint was used to bundle the foods. I'd prefer not to break open these bundles, but if we do peek inside one, we could see, you know, good amount of worm activity already accumulating amidst a whole bunch of leftovers. Everything has this kind of nice damp, gooey feeling to it. It's that feeling that you know that it isn't just decomposing vegetation. You could tell that it's also just a whole bunch of worms in there too, squishing around between your fingers. All right, so let's see here. That was a week ago. This will be going back 2 weeks now. Same story here. We've been trying to remain consistent so we can compare. Here too, we've got a paper bundle with a variety of different food items. Worms hanging out. This is a banana stem, obviously. But here too, we don't need to go tearing things apart too much. But we can definitely see a slight difference in the progress. This one definitely seems like it's been broken down somewhat more, as far as just the, you know, the wholeness of the leftovers that we spotted. I would think here now, geez, going back 1, 2, 3 weeks now, right? Just going back 3 weeks of composting activity where probably a similar feeding was applied with the food wrapped in some sort of a bedding material, paper, whatever. Probably a couple handfuls. And you can see a lot of worms amidst some different types of damp materials, probably at this point just leftovers of the bedding. That's what it looks like, just chunks of paper. I mean, there's probably still remnants of the food that they're eating in here. But at this point, they're probably going for the paper. This feels like it might be a piece of vegetation left over. Might have been a larger chunk of something. But you know, I bet you by the time we come back in here to feed, next time we feed, we'll be back to this corner again. I don't think we're going to see a whole lot of anything in there anymore. But it is kind of nice to see that in that much time, that much progress can occur. This is, you know, a banana stem, also quite broken down. I'll assume that that's the proper place for it and that it's 3 weeks going back. So it looks like that's also received quite a bit of attention, getting broken down. Okay, nice. That's it for the 2 younger red wiggler bins. They're both now fed. It's pretty generous from a carbon bedding type perspective. I wanted to get rid of some of those coffee filters and just figured jack up the portion a little bit. The food portion's not any more than it typically is. I don't think it was more or less the same type of feeding that they usually get. And I'm enjoying this corner feeding thing, so I'm definitely going to continue with it, even though we're back to square one. We've made a complete circuit. I've been continuing with it on the other bins that have already completed that circuit, and I have no real reason to stop. It's more interesting than always feeding in the same spot. Maybe I can even try to come up with some other feeding patterns we could try out. I'm always up for something new. All right, I'm going to get things covered up here. Pretty much ready to put everything away. I've just got a little cleanup to take care of and putting things away, but I'm not going to keep you around for that because that's boring. Really quick though, before I go, let me just say thank you. Thanks so much for watching. I appreciate your company. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please remember to leave me a thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching.